In Stavanger, Norway, Wesley So and Magnus Carlsen face off in a gripping showdown at Norway Chess 2018. Wesley determined to make history. Let's follow each move to see how it all unfolds. Wesley opens with a pawn to d4, and Magnus responds in kind, moving his pawn to d5. Wesley advances with pawn to c4, instantly challenging Magnus, who replies by pushing his pawn, c6, it's a Slav defense. Wesley captures Magnus's pawn on d5 with the c-pawn, and Magnus calmly takes back with his c-pawn, showing no fear of Wesley's aggressive play. Wesley develops his bishop to f4, eyeing potential control over the center, while Magnus counters with a knight to f6, bringing his pieces into play. Wesley follows suit, developing his knight to c3, and Magnus matches him, developing his knight to c6, setting the stage for a tactical battle. Wesley then plays knight to f3, solidifying his position, while Magnus is unyielding, pushing his pawn to a6. A preparatory move, perhaps anticipating future maneuvers. Wesley's rook takes its place on c1, signaling an intent to control the c-file. Magnus responds by developing his bishop to f5, reinforcing his control of the center. After Wesley plays e3, Magnus places his rook on c8, increasing the pressure on the c-file. Wesley continues to solidify his position by developing his bishop to e2, while Magnus moves his pawn to e6, preparing for future development. Wesley castles kingside, ensuring his king's safety, and Magnus is quick to follow suit by moving his knight to d7. Wesley's knight to a4 looks to grab control of the b6 square, while Magnus develops his bishop to e7, reinforcing his position. Wesley plays h3 as a precaution against any potential backrank threats, and Magnus castles kingside, securing his king behind a wall of pawns. Wesley plays a3, maintaining his pawn structure, while Magnus swiftly moves his knight to a5, looking to reposition. Wesley then plays knight to c5, posing a threat, while Magnus responds by moving his knight to c4, creating new opportunities. Wesley doesn't back down. He pushes b4, and Magnus capitalizes on the tension by capturing the knight on c5 with his own knight. Wesley recaptures on c5 with the d-pawn, and Magnus grabs Wesley's pawn on a3, further expanding his influence on the board. Wesley moves his knight to d4, hoping to centralize his pieces, while Magnus develops his bishop to e4, solidifying his presence in the center. Wesley plays f3, looking to dislodge the bishop, and Magnus responds by repositioning his bishop to g6. Wesley's queen then moves to b3, stabilizing his queenside and preparing for future attacks, and Magnus brings his knight to c4. Wesley captures the knight on c4 with his bishop, and Magnus recaptures with the pawn, keeping the position balanced. Wesley captures the pawn on c4 with his queen, and Magnus moves his queen to e8, looking to reposition. Wesley moves his bishop to g3, and Magnus responds with pawn to e5, seeking to open lines. Wesley's knight goes to b3, while Magnus shifts his bishop to d8, realigning his defense. Wesley plays queen to d5, putting pressure on Magnus's position, and Magnus responds by moving his queen to b5, keeping the tension alive. Wesley captures the pawn on e5 with his bishop, and Magnus quickly develops his bishop to e7. Wesley plays queen back to d2, while Magnus places his rook on d8, looking to contest the open file. Wesley moves his bishop to d6, while Magnus places his bishop on f6, strengthening his defensive stance. Wesley pushes e4, expanding in the center, and Magnus responds with h6, giving his king a bit of breathing room. Wesley moves his knight to d4, but Magnus captures it with his bishop, delivering a check. Wesley recaptures with his queen, and Magnus places his rook on a8. Wesley shifts his rook to e1, and Magnus brings his king to h7, keeping his position secure. Wesley advances his pawn to g4, but Magnus replies with f6, ensuring his defense. Wesley moves to f4, while Magnus's queen goes to c6, maintaining pressure on the center. Wesley then advances his f-pawn to f5, while Magnus moves his bishop to f7, looking to stabilize. Wesley pushes h4, and Magnus moves his rook to a8, setting up for potential counterplay. Wesley places his rook on c2, while Magnus plays a5, looking to break through on the queen side. As Wesley pushes g5, Magnus relocates his bishop to h5, preparing for a future defensive setup. Wesley advances to g6, prompting Magnus's king to h8 in response to the check. Wesley then moves b5, and Magnus captures the pawn on b5 with his queen. Wesley places his rook on b2, and Magnus shifts his queen to c6. Wesley moves his rook to b6, and Magnus moves his queen to c8, trying to regroup. Wesley plays queen to d5, and Magnus advances his pawn to a4. Wesley seizes the moment, capturing the pawn on b7 with his rook, and Magnus moves his rook to g8, desperately trying to defend. Wesley pushes c6, creating a massive advantage. Magnus resigns, acknowledging Wesley's superior position. With Wesley's last move, pushing the pawn to c6, Magnus Carlsen resigned the game. But why exactly did he resign? The pawn on c6 is incredibly powerful. Wesley's pawn is just 2 squares away from promotion, and it could become a queen very soon. The rook on b7 is positioned powerfully, putting pressure along Magnus's side of the board, especially on the 7th rank. And there it is. The first classical win for Wesley So over Magnus Carlsen. This game is a testament to Wesley's unyielding strategy, tight positional play, and calm pressure.